Hey guys, welcome back to Fragments of Faith. Before we get into this, if you're listening or watching, can you take a second to like, follow, subscribe, share, whatever platform you're on? It really helps us a lot. Also, we're really grateful that you guys are here.
Yeah, so this is one of those conversations that started with a simple question and then turned into something a lot heavier than either one of us expected.
Yeah, scripture used to be a comfort for me.
Yeah, and that's not a small thing to say out loud, especially in faith spaces where scripture is supposed to feel unshakable.
No. And I don't think people know what to do when you say that out loud.
Yeah, I think a lot of people hear it and then they panic because they don't know how to sit with the loss without trying to explain it away.
Exactly. For a long time, verses were something I reached for when things were going wrong or when I needed clarity. It was where I went when I didn't have words of my own. Sometimes I would just let my Bible just fall open to a random page and the words would speak to me like God knew what I was dealing with and knew exactly what verse to flip to. But at some point that changed. The words that were supposed to steady me, anchor me, remind me that God was near, that meaning existed, suffering wasn't random. Those words at some point stopped being comforting, especially when people started using it on me. Not to sit with me, not to listen, not to stay in the discomfort, but to end the conversation. It was never framed as shutting me down. I mean, obviously, it was framed as comfort, as care, or as faithfulness. Someone would quote a Bible verse and kind of just give me one of those. And it felt like being handed a band aid for an amputation. Scripture became a way to just kind of wrap grief up really quickly, a way to explain pain without having to feel it, kind of a way to signal, okay, we're done talking about this now. And the worst part is, these were verses that used to soothe me. They didn't feel neutral. I mean, they didn't feel harmless. They felt like salt in the wound. Let's take the verse that everyone knows. All right. The one people don't really even bother quoting correctly anymore. Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. But that verse gets shortened, turned into a slogan almost. All things work together for good. And people say it with confidence, trying to be very comforting. Like it's, I don't know, maybe a mic drop of a Christian consolation. But here's the problem. When my children died, when there was no future to point to, when there's no earthly restoration coming, that verse doesn't feel hopeful. It almost feels threatening, for lack of a better word, because if this is the good, then I don't want it. And when people say it, what I hear is not reassurance. What I hear is pressure to believe that this was part of some divine plan, pressure to trust one day I'll look back and say, oh, okay, that's why. Pressure to accept suffering now because it's supposed to be meaningful later. So the expectation becomes this: I'm supposed to be okay with this eventually. I'm supposed to see it as necessary, part of God's plan. Then there's Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope and a future. That was once my life verse. I used to feel beautiful. Now it feels like it belongs to a life I don't even live anymore because my children don't have a future here. They don't have hope in the way that verse is usually offered. They're not prospering. And I know people mean that verse spiritually. I know the argument, eternal hope, not earthly. All right, cool. But that's not how it lands. When it's said to a grieving parent, like it doesn't land right. Because whatever heaven means, that doesn't change the reality that my children are gone from here. Scripture skips over that reality and it doesn't comfort me. It just it disconnects me. Another verse that people lean on heavily is Corinthians 10:13. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. So that verse is about temptation, but it's always reshaped into God won't give you more than you can handle. That sentence makes me really angry because when I'm crushed or overwhelmed, barely holding myself together, that logic turns into your breaking point is now a personal failure. If I can't handle this, the problem must be me. That's not comforting. That's blame. And you know what? That's not even the whole verse. Like the rest of the verse says, but with temptation, he'll also provide a way of escape so that you can endure it. So it's actually talking about temptation, not the sugar-coated version that we normally get. Then there's Psalms 91:10. No harm will overtake you, and no disaster will come near your tent. That verse is often quoted after harm has already happened, after the disaster has already arrived. And when a verse promises protection after devastation, it can make me feel like the problem isn't the harm, like it's me. Maybe I failed spiritually. Maybe I misunderstood God. Maybe I didn't qualify for the promise in the first place. People also quote Matthew 28:20. I am with you always. That's meant to reassure me that God was present. But when my lived experience felt profoundly alone, that verse does not feel like comfort. It makes me question myself instead. What did I do wrong? Like, was I wrong about how lonely it was? Did I just imagine the absence? Romans 15:13 says, God will fill me with joy and peace as I trust him. That assumes that joy and peace are immediately available, as if trust automatically produces some sort of emotional relief. Like grief can be spiritually overridden. Sometimes hearing that verse feels like I'm being told I'm not doing faith the right way. Isaiah 41:10, that one says, do not fear, do not be dismayed. And sometimes that feels less like reassurance and more like a command, as if fear and dismay are, again, failures of faith instead of natural responses to devastation like they are, you know? And this is where scripture really started to break for me, not because it's wrong, not because I suddenly couldn't understand it, but because it stopped being something that could sit with me in my pain. And instead, it became something people used to explain it or fix it, move past it. The worst one, though, the one that I leaned the most on was Psalms 37:4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I know I keep sounding like a broken record, but I had two children with a genetic disorder called INAD. And that allowed them to grow up as neurotypical children for the first year of their lives. We didn't even know anything was wrong at first until Riley turned 1 and then she started to kind of regress. And then Harrison was born, and we still didn't know why Riley couldn't talk anymore, why her balance was off, why she screamed all night. Eventually, both of my kids were diagnosed, and we watched them lose all the abilities that they once had: eating, talking, crawling, and eventually moving. They were stuck in bodies that no longer worked for them. So the desire of my heart was one thing: for them to be okay, to live, to have a beautiful and long and healthy life. But he did not give me the desires of my heart because Harrison passed away New Year's Day 2022. And then Riley passed away July 23, 2022. I was then diagnosed with heart failure. I was hospitalized for weeks. I had Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. also known as broken heart syndrome. Apparently, I wanted them to be alive so badly that them dying almost killed me too. So when I say I'm angry at God, just know that I have a very valid reason. And I wish I could move past this and find comfort in God, in the Bible, in the Word, but something inside me has shut down. I stopped reading scripture a long time ago, not because I was not caring anymore, not because I was rebelling. I stopped because every time I opened the Bible, I would have to brace myself. I was tired of fighting with words that used to feel safe. So scripture stopped being something that could exist alongside my pain. And I didn't know how to keep engaging with it without being more angry or feeling like my faith had failed me. So I stepped away, and that's where I am right now. And this matters because I'm not supposed to say this. I'm not supposed to say that verses don't help anymore. Like, I'm supposed to say, yeah, no, they definitely still help. My faith is so strong now. I'm supposed to say, I've found peace. Honestly, I'm so jealous of people that can say that and it be the truth. But this is the truth of my lived experience. And I'm sharing it because I know I cannot be the only one who has felt scripture turn into something they don't connect with anymore and wondered if the problem was them.
Whitney, I'm gonna be honest from the start. Not defensive, not angry, but clear. I don't agree with you. I don't agree that scripture stopped being able to sit with the pain. I don't agree that scripture became unsafe because it failed. And I don't agree that stepping away from the word is the right or the faithful response. Even when it hurts deeply, even when it cuts close, even when it refuses to give us what we want. I do agree that scripture has been used poorly. I agree that verses a lot of times get thrown at people instead of carried with them. I agree that grief has been silenced in the name of faith, rushed, corrected, reframed, or spiritualized away because it made other people uncomfortable. I agree that scripture's been weaponized in some instances. I agree that it's been used as a punctuation instead of a presence. And I agree that people have quoted verses not to sit with suffering, but to end the conversation. But misuse does not redefine meaning, and abuse does not erase truth. The failure wasn't that scripture spoke too loudly. The failure was that people stopped listening long enough to let it speak honestly. Where we part ways is here. I believe scripture still speaks, even when it wounds us, even when it contradicts us, even when it unsettles us or refuses to explain itself in ways that feel fair or humane or satisfying, especially then. I don't believe scripture's authority is measured by how it makes us feel. And I don't believe pain gives us the right to decide what gets to remain true. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 says, all scripture is God breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. That verse doesn't come with a trauma clause. It doesn't say scripture is useful until it intersects with unbearable loss. It doesn't say authority expires when grief overwhelms us. It says scripture is God breathed, which means it doesn't belong to us. It's not ours to reshape or soften or silence or sideline when it confronts us. even when that confrontation feels cruel, even when it exposes truths we don't know how to live with. Scripture was never meant to function as emotional anesthesia. It was never meant to numb us or distract us or protect us from the reality of suffering. It was meant to form us. And formation is rarely gentle and almost never comfortable. One of the greatest mistakes we've made in modern faith is treating comfort as the primary measure of truth. If it soothes us, we trust it. If it reassures us, we repeat it. If it affirms our feelings, we call it holy. But if it wounds us, if it confronts us, if it refuses to validate our conclusions, we assume something must be wrong with it. Scripture never worked that way. Jacob wrestled with God and walked away limping for the rest of his life. And that limp was not evidence of failure. It was the mark of encounter. Job demanded answers and never received them. And God never apologized for withholding the explanation. The prophets were not comforted people, they were faithful people, faithful enough to speak truth into chaos and pay for it with their bodies. Jesus himself didn't quote scripture to calm himself down. He quoted it while being executed. He quoted it when God felt silent. He quoted it while pain was unanswered. And that matters. Because when Romans 8:28 gets reduced to a slogan, I agree, something sacred is lost. But I don't respond by letting go of the verse. I respond by refusing to let it be flattened into something it was never meant to be. Romans 8 does not deny suffering, it assumes it. Groaning, waiting, creation fractured, unfinished, aching for redemption. When Paul says, think that God works all things together for good, he's not calling death good. He's not declaring loss acceptable. He's not asking grieving parents to approve of tragedy. He's declaring that suffering does not get to be sovereign, that chaos doesn't get the final word, that evil does not get to define the limits of God's work. And I won't surrender that claim, even when the suffering is unbearable, even when the good feels offensive to imagine. Jeremiah 29:11 was not written to people living fulfilled, peaceful lives. It was written to people ripped from their homes, displaced, disoriented, watching their children grow up in exile and being told that this pain would not resolve quickly. Hope in that verse is not immediate relief. It is long obedience in a reality that does not make sense. When that verse is quoted carelessly, it wounds. But when it's abandoned entirely, something else is lost. And that's the insistence that God's purposes outlast devastation. Even when those purposes feel inaccessible or cruelly distant. That phrase, God won't give you more than you can handle. God never said that. It's not in Scripture. And I agree that turning suffering into a personal strength test is cruel. But Scripture does insist that endurance is possible. Not because we're capable, not because we're strong enough, but because God is faithful. And that distinction matters. Endurance is not emotional stability. It's not peace. It's not joy. It's not calm acceptance. Endurance is continued existence under a weight that should crush us. Psalm chapter 30, verse 5 is not a grief schedule. It's not a denial of long sorrow. It's a protest against finality. It says grief does not get eternity. It does not say grief resolves on our timeline. Isaiah 41:10 is not a command to suppress fear. It is God speaking into fear because fear is expected. Do not fear is not condemnation, it's presence. So here's where I can't follow you. I will not say scripture became unable to sit with the pain. I will not say God withdrew because comfort disappeared. And I will not say silence from God means absence. Scripture contains silence. Scripture contains unresolved grief. Scripture contains lament over things that never resolve neatly or clearly. That doesn't make it broken. It makes it honest. The Bible doesn't rush past devastation. It doesn't sanitize suffering. It doesn't protect us from grief. It walks straight into it. I understand the anger. I understand the exhaustion. I understand the desire to stop engaging with words that feel like knives. But I don't believe that stepping away heals what Scripture exposes. There are parts of the Bible that unsettle me, parts that refuse to let me be the authority, parts that confront my assumptions and strip away my illusions, and I stay. Not because it always comforts me, not because it explains everything, not because it gives me the answers I want, but because Scripture has survived centuries of grief and accusation and rage and doubt and exile and despair and unanswered prayer, and it still speaks. I don't hold on to Scripture because it protects me from pain. I hold it because it refuses to lie to me about reality. I don't believe that anger disqualifies faith, but I also don't believe that anger gets to redefine God. I don't believe grief makes scripture untrue, and I don't believe stepping back from the word is morally neutral. Distance changes us. Silence reshapes us. Absence forms us whether we admit it or not. You were honest about where you are, and I respect that honesty. But I'm honest about where I stand. I still trust the word, not because it feels safe, but because it is proven strong enough to confront suffering without flinching. Faith was never meant to make us comfortable. It was never meant to shield us from pain. Sometimes faith does only one thing. It keeps us tethered to truth, to God, to something larger than our grief when everything else has come undone. And I'm still tethered. So I think my my question for you right now at this point is, do you think scripture can still have authority even when it doesn't feel emotionally reachable, or does it need to feel comforting to still count for you?
I don't think it needs to be comforting to count for me. I'm not really sure.
Okay, so if scripture is not allowed to explain suffering, what role do you think it should play in the middle of it?
Well, I mean, I don't think scripture really explains away grief or suffering or anything. I mean, it even says like you're going to suffer. Like I mean, it even says it straight in there. But the verses that did comfort me are now just hollow because it seems like it's a promise that was made that wasn't kept.
Okay, so is there a point where scripture is allowed to confront us again, or does confrontation just feel like harm now?
Now we both know I like confrontation, so, like, that's not a problem, I guess. I mean,
Okay, so
obviously, it's
then
supposed to have a confrontation with what you're doing wrong and what you should be doing. That's a confrontational, you know, issue. People do need to be called out when they're not doing the right things. Although I do think that you can do the right things and live a good life without scripture telling you to. So I don't know.
okay, so I guess then how do you decide what gets to challenge your experience, if anything does anymore?
You mean biblically or
Well, I mean anything.
I don't know if you're going to want to put this in the podcast or not, but there is one thing that sort of is part of the reason why I don't really feel like God's the authority on suffering because people are like, well, God lost his son too. He got him back. He got him back after a weekend. So I don't really feel like he's an authority on loss either. And him flooding the earth, like that's kind of like, well, you caused that suffering too. So like even though you lost all these people that were worshiping you, like that's not really that's something you could have prevented, you know? I don't know what you're really asking me, like what am I supposed to say?
All right, so I guess then let me those things are things we can address in other episodes. I don't want to go too deep into that. I
I figured.
um but so what would have to change for scripture to feel less like pressure and more like presence, if that's even possible for you anymore?
I mean, scripture's not going to change. I mean, it's been the same for, however long. So I know that it's not on scripture's end. It would have to change in me. Something would have to change within me. And I think it's part of the reason why we're here because I'm still wrestling with what that part is. I I know that something has to change within me for me to find comfort and purpose in the word again, but I don't know what I need to do for that yet.
All right, last question. Is there a difference for you between scripture being misused and scripture being untrue? Or do those things feel inseparable right now?
No, I think my biggest issue is scripture being misused, either misquoted or trying to comfort someone, but using the verse in the way that it was not intended. I think, the Bible can still be true, but people misusing it is what my issue is.
Whitney, thank you for answering those questions honestly. I know it's not always easy to put those answers into words.
Yeah, especially when you don't give me the questions beforehand. I'm always like, I have no idea what you're going to ask. So, but yeah, I mean, that's where I am right now.
And I think that's the part we want to name as we close. This episode is not going to end with us agreeing, and it's okay. We didn't do this to fix anything or to clean it up.
Right. And I'm not trying to land anywhere finished with it.
Yeah, and I'm not asking you to. I I still believe what I believe about God and Scripture, but I also believe that conversations like this matter even when they're unfinished.
I think that's what I've needed more than answers, honestly, just space to say it without being corrected.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, that's really the heart of this. Some of you probably heard yourself in what Whitney said. Some of you might have heard yourself in what I said, and maybe there are some of you out there that are somewhere in between.
And if you are, you're not doing faith wrong.
Exactly. And you don't have to have it all figured out yet to stay in the conversation.
That's kind of the whole point of this podcast.
It is. So if this stirred something in you, whether it's questions or frustration or recognition, we'd really love to hear your story.
And you can share that with us at fragmentsoffaith.com.
Yeah, we read them and they help shape where these conversations go next.
Thank you guys for sitting with us in this one.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.